is we need 100,000 young Americans in Washington tomorrow saying there's no war allowed in Korea.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. Most of our program will be about the teach-in on Korea in New Haven. But we begin with news from Palestine. On February 6th, there was an Israeli raid in the city of Nablus, which is Palestine's largest city. It ended up killing one young man and injuring scores of others. Nablus is in Area A. Over 20 years ago, the Israelis and Yasser Arafat made an agreement. Until there was permanent peace, the West Bank would be divided into three areas, A, B, and C. In Area A, the Palestinians would have complete control. If there was some dispute, if the Israelis wanted to arrest someone, they would get a warrant. The Palestinian police would then cooperate. On February 6th, the Israelis ignored that agreement and just barreled into Nablus, going after someone they claimed had been involved in a murder. Palestinian youth then went into the streets and threw stones at Israeli military vehicles, mainly armored trucks. The Israelis then used live fire. They killed Khalid, Walid, Jamil, Tayeh, and injured many others. By one account, 115 other people were injured. 3 are in a coma. It's uncertain if they will live. This is video from the funeral of Khalid, Walid, Jamil, Tayeh. Just a bit about the trial of youth Ahaed Tamimi. The military judge decided that there would be no media allowed in the courtroom. Only just some of the family of Tamimi would be allowed in. This is a picture of Tamimi's father, Bassem, in the courtroom waving to his daughter and asking her to be strong. A final note in news from the area: the Israeli police have recommended that the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, be arrested, not for his many war crimes, but for bribery. Now to the teach-in by promoting enduring peace about Korea. I was one of the speakers and cautioned about the glowing claims that the U.S. military is so mighty that a victory over the North Koreans would be easy and complete. I have degrees in history, but I have no expertise in war. My only expertise is being haunted since the 1950s by the specter of nuclear war and of remembering the sirens that would be tested every Saturday at noon with their ear-shattering mechanical wail. I'll make a few points. The first is to note the typical overconfidence of militarists, the men and women who are sure that their fancy weapons and clever strategies will smash the enemy quickly and utterly. I'm talking mainly about the U.S., but we hear similar astounding claims from North Korea. From our politicians, we hear that a Korean war will be over there and that North Korean forces will be quickly wiped out. This is incredibly foolish, stupid. Let's consider the fighting that began in 1950. Now, if we could get to the next slide. Okay, this is Korea. And next slide after that. So this is our website, and I superimposed a couple red arrows to show you how to get to our archives. We have them on a number of different subjects and a new archive about Korea. If you could go to the next slide. So this is the Korea archive. Next one. And this is from a site of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was an article written over 15 years ago for the CIA, and some of it is quite frank, admitting their mistakes in 1950. In it, it says that the Far East Command and its chief, the legendary Douglas MacArthur, were unanimous that no Asian troops could stand up to the American military might without being annihilated.
That's big words.
They were also sure that China would never commit troops to the war out of fear of World War III. Next slide, please. This is the two zones, roughly from 45 to 50 before the fighting. Next slide, please. June of 50, the fighting starts, and within 2 months, communist troops, the forces loyal to Kim's grandfather, however you wanted to designate them, they sweep down, and all but a little area is conquered. Then there's a counterattack, goes all the way up to the Yalu River, and then the Chinese, who never were going to come in a big way and sweep down. And then for the next 3 years, hideous, horrible, brutal fighting. But I want to point out that even in 1953, 3 years later, the war was going on with huge intensity. And the North Koreans were continuing to fight, even though every North Korean city had been burned to the ground. Compare that to France, just 10 years earlier. France, one of the biggest empires in the world, when the Germans invaded, France lasted 6 weeks and surrendered. I don't think the Koreans are pushovers. Our featured speaker was Alexis Dudden from the History Department at the University of Connecticut. She's a specialist in Japanese and Korean history. She had been studying last year in Korea. Her talk was informal and she encouraged comments from the audience. So we stitched together portions of her talk.
But I'm looking at 2015 Tokyo. Japan has a remarkably active peace community. Japan has the best constitution in the world, right? It outlaws war. But not until 2015 was this tested in a new world sense. And 100,000 young Japanese took to the streets and said, we're not going to accept a change to our constitution. The reason I put that in this context is we need 100,000 young Americans in Washington tomorrow saying there's no war allowed in Korea. Because until we do that, and that's why the Olympics are our chance, all of a sudden I'm getting texts from friends who knew we were in Korea last year. Oh, wow, Pyeongchang's beautiful. Oh, the skiing looks great. Okay, let's take advantage of this situation, because all of a sudden a place that is just not on the radar for our friends is on television every day. In the mix, and as Johanna said this beautifully from Greece, How dare he not shake hands? The Olympics is about shaking hands. I was stunned, horrified, and I thought, wow, why couldn't you, okay, if you don't want to shake hands, but you have to look the enemy in the eye. If that's how you're conceiving it, if you're a hardline position. So a lot of this also as a teacher made me realize how little Americans understand about what happened in the 1950s. And in the 1950s, the United States, as Stanley Heller alluded to, we dropped more tonnage on North Korea in terms of destructive bombs than the sum total of the Asia-Pacific War. The United States annihilated what is North Korea today, and yet North Korea stands. And this is the problem and the calculus of dealing with North Korea. You have two countries now, South and North Korea, that have histories longer than Algeria. I mean, they've been countries longer than Algeria, but we don't think that way because it's Asia. So I think we're seeing a lot in the news about, well, young South Koreans don't want to march under the unification flag. So I wore my T-shirt from the 1990s. Sorry for the little extraordinary dance that I do here. But, okay, so this is the One Korea Festival. One Korea, right? Okay, so what's interesting about this is, where do you think the T-shirt's from?
China.
No, it's actually not made in China, but funny. The One Korea idea comes from Japan. And the One Korea, One Korea, and Hanara, it's not really, it wasn't even a word in Korean in Korea, but something that came about post-colonial Korea in Japan. And this is something that is off the radar until tonight. Apparently, NBC, our network, is under fire for a comment made by its host at the opening ceremonies that Koreans were really grateful to the Japanese for economic inspiration, quote unquote. NBC has already apologized to the people of Korea. But this is also something to take advantage of. People don't know why Korea is divided. People don't know what the animosity stems from.
And they teach them in school?
They don't know that the Japanese prevented Koreans from learning Korean in school, and they had to give up their names. And my first dictionaries, I first went to Korea in 1986, and my first English-Korean dictionaries define civil war as the war between the states, i.e. the United States. You could not use the word civil war to define what had happened in Korea, because if you did, that defined you as a communist. And it denied you a visa. The most famous U.S. analysts of Korea that used the term civil war for 1950 to 53 were branded communist and not allowed in the country of South Korea. Fast forward to today, every young Korean, of course it was a civil war, who cares? We don't want to deal with their economic problems. And this is also what I'm asking us to think about, because one of the things that both Andy and I learned last year in Seoul that was really new for me, actually, is all of my students, highly educated, very smart, under the age of 25, do not want to pay for the merger of the two countries because we're talking $3 trillion. And they've got the highest youth unemployment. It'd be like telling Connecticut students that they all of a sudden needed to absorb the costs of something. What we have to do as people who understand that war is not an option, or the denial of human, existence is not an option, have to come up with a different language. And I would welcome your comments about what words to use. But in terms of Korean, and why I wear the One Korea T-shirt, is, okay, 1945, the empire collapses. There are 600,000 Koreans in Japan, both slave labor, forced labor, and also people who thought that was their economic chance. In the 1930s, they'd emigrated. It's a mess. It's disaster. Moved populations around and around, but the highest overseas Korean population for a long time is in Japan. All of a sudden, the war breaks out, and in the occupation of Japan under the United States in 1950, people of Korean ethnicity and birth had to pick a side. And a surprising number of people born in what today is South Korea picked affiliation with North Korea because of the imprimatur of American imperialism. Those people today are branded pro-North, pro-communist, pro-Kim regime, but they simply didn't want to be told by the United States in 1950, 1952, that they had to pick affiliation with a dictatorial pro-US regime. And again, this isn't an anti-American statement to make, it's simply what happened. And so you've got this overseas community in Japan that since 1950s has been promoting one Korea. This is Hanara, like one country. But today, for young South Koreans, it's a different mix. Their country is the 11th largest economy in the world. North Korea is less than Haiti. And they say, well, why am I giving up what my family fought for to pay for that? Besides, they're threatening, they're destabilizing everything, and I don't want to live like that. So it's not for me to judge, it's for me to say, okay, we need to come up with new language for what we're talking about. And that, when you talk about the handshake, I was blown away more that Pence did not stand up for unified Korea marching in. That, to me, was the ultimate disgrace, because how dare you? First of all, it's the host country. But if the United States wants to say, okay, well, the Kim regime is illegitimate, I'm not shaking her hand. Okay, a policy choice. I would not have made it, but a policy choice. But not to stand up for the human beings that are the athletes? It's the Olympics. It's about sport. It's not supposed to be about anything other than those people whose entire lives are sport. And that's where we just lost any credibility at all in terms of brokering anything other than war, which we know doesn't work as a policy. We can drop as much tonnage as we want. Dr. Marks brought onto the table this question of the bloody nose strategy. Do you guys know what the bloody nose... So, all right, bloody nose is a policy that is currently on the table, and I am scareder than I've ever been professionally, because I would argue we now have 50-50 in Washington. And bloody nose is a hyper-masculinist notion that if you go punch the other team, they're going to be so surprised they're not going to punch back. And that's why it's referred to as this, which is ironic insofar as the government of Imperial Japan in 1941 thought that the United States would be so surprised if they attacked Pearl Harbor, we wouldn't fight back. That didn't go so well for Japan, so it's a really bad decision to model on. But we're modeling on it because we're using nuclear weapons, and we're using these so-called new low-yield tactical smart bombs, which each one is the tonnage of a Hiroshima bomb. I was saying in my class this week in stores, I said, okay guys, I actually, I personally care where the world is going, so you know my politics. But if you voted for Trump, if you voted for Hillary, a nuclear bomb does not care, because it doesn't actually discern your politics. And I completely agree with you. Interesting in the mix is my 20-year-olds talk about school shootings. This is how they conceive of violence. They don't conceive of violence any other way, and this is the Sandy Hook generation. And they talk about this in terms of, well, what do you expect? We know we're about to die any time when we go to school. And it's something I really hadn't thought about. So I agree with you. If they
feel like that?
That's how they're taught before they get to college, and since there's no draft, and a lot of them also are paying for college by joining the military, which is a flip of the GI Bill of old. So it's, we've got a lot going against us in terms of reaching them. I don't think the 20-year-olds are unreachable, but as we've been talking about, I don't think it's not part of the curriculum right now. Students, I have at the moment 35 students in a class on nuclear history. One in 8th grade read John Hersey's Hiroshima. None of the rest had even heard it existed. And that used to be required reading. I mean, we all read it. But that's out of the picture, and yet school shootings are what they train for. So I'm dealing, and in the mix, I have many students who are veterans or active duty going to Iraq and Afghanistan. So, okay, here's another war. And on top of that, one has to explain, well, but nuclear is different. This is a different thing that we're throwing into the mix. We're talking about, the complete annihilation, not just of a population, but the soil, the water, the air. And so we've got something else going on that we have to reach a new world. Check on it. I look at it this way. North and South Korea are the first countries on the planet to come into being after Hiroshima and Nagasaki as states, as distinct states. So if you take that as a baseline, then of course North Korea went on a nuclear weapons program. And if, we can talk about why North Korea chose this, but if we want to talk optimistically for a second, maybe if I can get to what you wanted me to speak about, which was having hope, because I'm so upset that he didn't stand up for the team, because that really confirmed to me we don't have a policy other than to destroy, which, as we know, is not a policy.
And he has all these wars that are going, and then the young people have been raised in violence at home. 30,000 people died from Gantz's violence in the United States. Mass shootings is just, oh yeah, let's pray and thought and blah blah, and put a yellow ribbon and all that kind of stuff. So I guess they're immune to it. Because there's so much violence.
There's so much violence. There's so much violence they don't know where to start. Yeah. So if we can show them that there's a way, and again, this is where it's in each of our interests to take advantage of these pictures of Korea, of beautiful Korea, and say, these are people that, one team developed nuclear weapons. South Korea could have nuclear weapons on its own in about 2 weeks. It's not as if their physicists are stupid. They've just been told they're not allowed to have them by the United States, so they don't have them. And same with Japan. I mean, we're really not talking about a people not prepared to develop this technology. But they have chosen specifically, not different from Japan, the United States military is not allowed to station nuclear weapons in South Korean territory, precisely so South Korea has the ability to say to the North, we don't have them, so you can't have them either. Japan has them insofar as the United States stations its weapons in its bases there. And this is a subtle difference in terms of occupation, sort of military occupation policies, but it's real. So South Korea, Moon Jae-in in particular, this is a really interesting precedent, right? He is arguably the first legitimate president that South Korea has in its 60-plus year history, in that he was he is the child of North Korean refugees. He grew up in a way that dirt poor used to be an expression. His one-room house on an island on dirt without a toilet counts as dirt poor growing up. He managed to go to Catholic school. He is a devout Catholic because those are the people who took care of him. He's also special forces. Last year during the election campaign, when he was asked would he defend his country from North Korea, he got out whatever a single reflex rifle is, and he got on television and says, the first North Korean that attacks South Korea, I will kill. I mean, this is not a pacifist by any definition of the word, nor is he an appeaser, but to say that he is, pro-North, which is what the peaceful outcome crowd refers to him as, he's pro-North because his family is North Korean. I mean, could you be anti-Massachusetts if your family came from Massachusetts? It's that ridiculous at that level. He is anti-war because any military confrontation on the Korean Peninsula is the decimation of his capital city, his economic base, and Korea. And so he has to figure out how to explain to young South Koreans that being in favor of peace is in favor of Korea's safety and future, not a communist appeasement, which unfortunately is what the Trump administration is rebranding any unification discussion as.
More of her talk next week. At the end of the teach-in, we picked up these signs and did some chanting to make the point that war in Korea must be out of the question. want? Peace! When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Peace!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Peace!
When do we want it?
Now!
Sweep war off the table.
Sweep war off the table!
Sweep
war off the table!
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like!
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like!
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like!
No war in Korea, help Puerto Rico instead.
No war in Korea! Help Puerto Rico instead! No war in Korea! Help Puerto Rico instead! Ban, ban nuclear weapons! Ban, ban nuclear weapons! Ban, ban nuclear weapons! Peace, people, and planning over profits! Peace, people, and planning over profits! Peace, people, and planning over profits!
No justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Korea needs truth and reconciliation.
That's good also.
Let all Koreans speak and write freely, no censorship.
Koreans say no war, promote peace.
Expand the Olympic truce. Shove war off the table. Before I go, a note about a teach-in, February 24th in West Hartford. It's entitled, For a Livable World, Climate Justice Now. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I am Stanley Heller for The Struggle.